Welcome. Happy Easter to those who celebrate. This is our first Baltimore Baseball Babble of 2024. That's the year we're in. So first of 9, now through, do it through November, 9 innings. And we're pleased to welcome David, who is I believe you're still the president or chairman, whatever the title is, because it varies, of the Elysian Fields chapter. So we're honored to have him. Couple announcements. Anybody who wants to contribute to this issue of the Baltimore Chop, you basically have until tomorrow to submit anything. I think we have enough articles, but we'll take some last minute stuff. We do have our monthly Peeps of the Peeb meeting this coming Wednesday, and I believe it's Dan Schlossberg and his new book, Home Run King, because obviously we're coming up on the anniversary of the 50th anniversary of Hank Aaron passing Babe Ruth in Atlanta in early April 1974. Let me think. Do I have any other announcements? You will get one in the near future. We are looking to dedicate the historical marker sometime in April. We're waiting to hear back from some speakers at Union Park in Baltimore, where the 1890s National League Orioles played and won a lot of championships. It might be in the middle of the day, so obviously you have to be local to come to it. But once everything's finalized, that information will come out. So, David has spoken to us in the past. I loved his book on the year 1966. I have it upstairs somewhere because I'm redoing my cave slowly. So tonight he's going to talk to us about his most recent publication on Fenway. So hold your questions till the end or put them in the chat. And David, thank you for joining us. I know it's spring break for some people and vacation and Easter and all that kind of stuff. So we appreciate you coming out on a Sunday night.
Well,
Go ahead.
thank you. It's always a privilege, Peter, to be with the Baltimore chapter of SABR. I want to break my presentation into 3 parts. I'll talk a little bit about what's in the book, The Fenway Effect, A Cultural History of the Boston Red Sox. I'll talk about the research process and then the writing process. I'll try to keep my presentation within the 15 to 20-minute range. It's pretty evident what the topics would be when you tackle a book like this. You're going to have a chapter about the Jimmy Fund. You'll have a chapter about Babe Ruth, let's say. Originally, I was going to have a chapter also about Bucky Dent, but as I got into the writing process, it was starting to look like a Yankees Red Sox book. So I decided to combine everything into one chapter about the rivalry. I tried to think a little bit out of the box. I talked about the Citgo sign and the political controversies that arise over the Citgo sign in the past few decades, the statues, the architectural significance, the artistic significance of the statues at Fenway. There's also a chapter about 1975, how it was a time of optimism that was needed, and Carlton Fisk's home run represents optimism. In point of fact, it was a pretty pessimistic time for the country after Watergate, after Vietnam. But that one home run gave a lot of hope, and there were some other things in 1975 that gave hope and gave, I would say, maybe some ballast for optimism that I talk about. Game 6, 1986 World Series, that's been done to death. So I came at it from a different perspective. I talked about Bill Buckner and his redemption on Curb Your Enthusiasm. And that's how I tackled 86 and the World Series against the Mets. There's a chapter about Sam Malone. There's also a chapter about Narragansett, which might be obvious to New Englanders, but to me, based in northern New Jersey, I hadn't been familiar with it. When I started to read about Narragansett, I realized Red Sox fans of a certain age would be reading this book. They're going to expect some kind of mention about it. And the more I got into the research, the more I realized it deserved its own chapter. Narragansett beer, Kurt Gowdy, that's covered in a chapter. So let me talk a little bit about the research process. I tried to get microfilm from Boston newspapers delivered through interlibrary loan to the New York Public Library, and it did not work. No archive, no library, no university would release microfilm of these defunct Boston newspapers. I knew I needed them because if I'm writing about Babe Ruth being traded to the Yankees, I can't just rely on the Boston Globe, which I can get through newspapers.com or ProQuest. I need as much as I can get. So I tabled a visit to the Boston Library because I knew that if I went there first in my journey, what would happen inevitably would be somebody from this chapter, somebody from the Boston chapter, from the Elysian Fields chapter would say something to me, or I'd see something in a documentary, or I would read about something and I'd say, gee, I need to go back to Boston. Well, money isn't infinite, time isn't infinite, and I didn't want to make a lot of trips to Boston if I didn't need to. So I pushed a research trip to a point where I said to myself, it has to be at least halfway through this writing process. I don't want to use it as a crutch, and let me start developing other sources. Let me start developing other lines of questioning. That way, when I go, I'll be armed with a draft and some research here. For the Babe Ruth trade, for example, I have access to all of the New York newspapers of the day on microfilm at the New York Public Library. So I worked on what I could work on. The Tom Seaver chapter, for example, the Bill Buckner chapter, for example. I didn't really need microfilm for that. That I could get information on my own through the databases I mentioned. So when I went to Boston, I had a draft, I had a topic list, my table of contents, my topics, subtopics, etc. And I just went one by one. And some topics required a lot more research. Basically, I just cropped the entire page of the newspaper for that topic, uploaded it to a flash drive. I was at the Boston Library for 3 days, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. or thereabouts, taking a half hour for lunch. And when I got back to my hotel room on the third night after this, I think I went on a Sunday actually, and then started Monday morning. So by Wednesday night, I was pretty much finished. I scheduled a Fenway Park tour on Thursday. This was in December. And then I went back to the library for some cleanup research and then home. Well, Wednesday night, I'm sitting in the hotel room and I'm starting to go through these hundreds of articles on PDF. I must have had 300 at least. And I started to relabel them according to my own labeling system. And I was so overtired that I got about 10 or 12 in and I hit the wall. I said, you know what? Let me just wait until tomorrow. I have a 4-hour train ride. I'll do it then. And I simply put on the headphones. I put on the Ben Affleck documentary, The Curse of the Bambino from HBO. That was on YouTube. The Ted Williams HBO documentary was on YouTube. I just listened to that as I did my work. And by the time that I got into Newark, all the folders were organized, the subfolders, the sub-subfolders. And that's a real issue when you're doing a project of this size. You need to be hyper vigilant about your organization because you're investing time in yourself. In other words, you don't want 6 months from now to be hunting for something. You want to be able to find it within 10 seconds, if not less. So that was pretty much the research process as far as Boston. Everywhere else, the internet, documentaries, the secret sauce to the book, of course, is the last chapter, which is oral history. That was fairly easy because I just put the word out to SABR chapters in New England. I emailed friends and family, put notices on Facebook and Twitter, and people were more than happy to share their experiences being Red Sox fans. They all said something similar and they all said something different. They all come from different walks of life, different ages, generations, etc. Very deeply passionate about the Red Sox. And I was delighted to have their experiences chronicled in the book. The writing process was a little different for me this time than it has been in the past. In the past, I usually took the approach of I'm going to sit down and write as much as I can for as long as I can, and I'll worry about editing later. I'll worry about grammar and paragraph breaks and everything else. Let me just write. The only thing that was similar this time is I always did my endnotes as I went. I did the formatting as I went along. This time, I did not do that because inevitably what would happen if I just wrote as much as I could, I would crash. I would hit a wall. I made a point to myself to say, you need to do this within a certain timeline. This is a marathon. It's not a bunch of sprints. So I made a vow to have a goal of 3 pages a day. Some days might be 5 pages, but get 3 pages a day. And the typical week for me would be Sunday morning, taking a piece of paper, outlining a chapter, taking about 30 to 60 minutes to do that, putting it aside, Monday morning, start, and just start writing. 3 pages, and it could take 6 hours to get 3 good pages because you have to find the research. Maybe you get inspired to do new research on the internet or in a newspaper database, and you're getting more information, and it could take a while till you massage it, till you get the paragraph breaks right, the quotes, etc. And by the end of the week, I had a chapter. You're not writing every single day, at least I wasn't, because one day I might have to go to the New York Public Library. One day might be an interview day. One day might be picking out the photos or getting the licenses or writing the captions. Of course, you want to walk away from the project. You need to have breaks so you come back to it with fresh eyes. So that is how I approached pretty much every chapter, and my stress level went down 90% compared to other projects. My efficiency went up about 90% compared to other projects because you're really investing time. Like I said, with the research and the organization, you're investing time at the beginning so you have less to do later on. What you want to do when you get to the end of this is cleanup work. You don't want to do restructuring. This is a long, long journey, and it takes a lot out of you. And when I got to the end, there were very little structural changes. There were places where I said, well, that paragraph can move from page 3 to page 2, or this paragraph can be taken out, things like that. But I didn't really have anything in the way of overhauling or editing to a great degree. It was just lots of little particular stuff, pet peeves that I have, grammar issues, maybe a misspelling that I didn't catch the first time. And that was a real pleasure. Outlining at the beginning and having a roadmap is so important. You're not going to use everything in the roadmap. So for Bill Buckner, for example, I had an elaborate outline with Larry David and the history of Curb Your Enthusiasm and the history of Seinfeld and his stand-up comedy career and how he wrote for Saturday Night Live and how he wrote for Fridays and all of this wonderful information. I only have 20 pages, and it can't be I can't have 10 pages about Larry David and his show, because then I only have 10 pages to discuss Bill Buckner, and the chapter is about Bill Buckner. So you have to start making choices. 3 pages about Curb, 2 pages about Seinfeld, maybe 3 pages about Seinfeld. How many pages for Bill Buckner's career? Maybe 4, maybe 5, maybe 2. You just start to develop a feel for what works. I didn't want to recount the entire episode scene by scene, so I summarized as best I could and got the salient points out. You could write 50 pages on Curb Your Enthusiasm. All of the real life cameos, the sports references on Seinfeld, and tying that in, sports cameos on Seinfeld, Derek Jeter, Bernie Williams, etc. you can touch on it, but to go deeply into it would not serve the reader. You would be reading this and you would say, he's going off on tangents. I just want a nice chunk of what this chapter should be about. I don't need chapter and verse and so much detail. The other thing that helped was having a guardrail of a 20-page limit per chapter. I knew what the word count would be, and I knew roughly 20 pages per chapter would hit that word count. Some chapters might go less, some chapters might go more, but having that protection really keeps you within it keeps you on a straight and narrow path. As I said, in the past, I would just write and write and write and worry about editing later. That did not serve me well. It was much easier this time around. So for any of you who are writing books or writing journal articles, I encourage you to develop an outline and just play around with it and see how it takes you, and just try to do it in bite-sized chunks. A project of this size, especially one that's not a narrative, these are all discrete chapters, 17 chapters. They're all different. There's no continuity or no segue from one chapter to another. It's an anthology. So that's a benefit. It's also a disadvantage because segues can keep you going. You can tease the reader at the end of chapter 1 and go into chapter 2, but I didn't have that here. On the other hand, the benefit was I didn't have to worry about it. I'm just focusing on this part of the Red Sox history. I'm focusing on Carl Yastrzemski, let's say. Okay, what do I want to say about Carl Yastrzemski? What about the culture of the Red Sox? Well, he's an icon. Why is he an icon? Well, he started as a rookie. He succeeded Ted Williams. That's a pretty big item. That's a big ticket item. You have to fill the shoes of a legend. Well, how do I convey that? I talked about other things, other successors to legends like Johnny Carson and Jay Leno and so on, and tried to tie those things in together. It was an incredible journey. I learned a terrific amount about the Red Sox organization. I think the biggest lesson I learned was I knew that New Englanders were passionate about the Red Sox. I didn't know how deep that passion went until I started talking to people, doing the research, and just listening and reading. I'll close by saying the people who shared their experiences with me responded by email. I did not get back paragraphs in response to my questions. I got back pages, to the point where I had to call several, if not all, and tell them, I have to truncate this. This is wonderful stuff. I simply don't have enough pages to put this in because I want to be fair to everybody. I want everybody to participate. I can't have 9 pages for one person. So those were difficult choices, but they all understood. And they said, look, this is for the good of the book, but once I start writing about the Red Sox, I can't stop, David. So I use whatever you can, and I'm happy to be a part of it. And that's the way it was. I was immediately embraced as part of their community because I'm chronicling a different part of the Red Sox. I'm chronicling the culture and the pop culture, but also their experiences. And as I said, that's the secret sauce. So with that, I will close. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions, anybody? David, when did this come out?
Well, officially, it's coming out tomorrow. You can buy it on Amazon now, but April 1st is the drop date, I believe, in bookstores. I will caution you, though, I think you're better off calling up University of Nebraska Press and buying through their what would you call it, the distribution department, the marketing department, because you get a 40% discount on baseball books for the next few weeks. So I encourage you to call Nebraska and get that deal because it's not going to last forever.
If you have a question, unmute and just ask it. We have a small group.
Hey David, I have a
Hey.
question. I was looking on your Twitter or X that they call it now. Are you working on a biography for Bo Belinsky?
I am. I'm in the home stretch of a biography of Bo Belinsky and a book about 1978. One
Okay,
is for McFarland and the other is for Nebraska.
okay. I was just kind of wondering. So yeah, Bo's character I read, Bo Pitching and Wooing, his like autobiography that came out in
Yeah.
like the 70s. A lot of the stories that he fabricated, he was definitely a character for that no-hitter that he pitched at Dodger Stadium back in 1962.
Well, again, that's a great point because I saved that to the end. I haven't read it yet because I knew that if I read it, I would use it as a crutch and I would let it affect my journalism. I would let it affect my interpretation of events. And I said, let me get the book drafted and I'll use his take on as seasoning. And it's Maury Allen being his ghostwriter. It's not him, but Maury Allen did it with his full cooperation. I think that's actually the subtitle, with the full cooperation of Bo Belinsky. But there was a tremendous amount I found on newspapers.com from the Hawaii newspapers when he played for the Islanders.
Yeah, because I'm actually I'm in Aberdeen, South Dakota. So back in the day, we used to have an Orioles
Yeah.
farm team, and Bo pitched here in 1958, and he led the Northern League, I think, like with a 2.62 ERA or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he led the league in strikeouts and stuff too. So yeah, when I was kind of doing my own research at the local library here, and then I came across him, he definitely had a fun lifestyle with a lifetime record of like 28 and 51. I think his lifetime record
And
was and stuff like that too.
more people were lined up for him than for Steve Carlton at these memorabilia shows.
Yeah, and then he quotes himself, but he kind of understood that, it's sports and entertainment. So like he said, a lot of the stuff he did, it was like fabricated and he made up stories, but he realized, people that are, have money to spend for disposable income, he realized like that's what sports are. They're a way for people to escape
Right.
reality and stuff too. So, but yeah, he was definitely a cool character.
Yeah.
So check out the book when that comes out.
Anyone else? Any other questions, comments,
David, how
rebuttal?
many books have you done total now?
I couldn't hear that.
I think he was
Peter.
asking
David, how many books do you have now total?
6. I've written 4 and I've edited 2 anthologies. Peter, was that you who asked that question?
Yeah, because I know some of your past ones. I just didn't know the entire
Your
entire catalog to date.
Your sound sync is off with the video.
That's what happens when you're on Wi-Fi on the 3rd floor.
How do you pick your subject matters?
I like Wee Willie Keeler, you hit them where they ain't. I look for what hasn't been done, and there's not a lot at SABR conventions or the Cooperstown Symposium or 9 about pop culture and baseball. And I'm a pop culture guy. So if you read 62, if you read 66, you'll find a lot of TV references, a lot of movie references in there because they were both big years for those genres, or those areas rather. Genres being maybe like spies for the 66 book and superheroes because of Batman. 62 was a wonderful year for movies, and no one had done it. I remember with 62 specifically, I was in a book proposal class that I had taken a few times to just air out some ideas. And my Brooklyn Dodgers book was born in that workshop. So I took it again, and I had this idea for a book about the 62 Mets and the 62 Colt 45s. And that would be the book. And when I got to the class, my instructor, who was a literary agent, said, I understand you're a baseball guy, but books with broader topics get broader readerships. And I came home that night and I researched 1962. There were certain things I knew that happened. I knew the Flintstones were on the air. I knew the Dick Van Dyke Show was on the air. I knew about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but there were so many other things that happened. I said, geez, somebody has to have written a book about this. And nobody had, at least not with baseball as the spine. So I said, this is what I'm going to do. I'll do half and half, or more than half baseball, and then half history, culture, pop culture, et cetera. And the class had a great response to it, and I knew I was on the right track.
Yeah, it's interesting when you start thinking about Seinfeld, right? Because we all remember the Keith Hernandez
Right.
and all that. I wasn't as familiar with Larry David. And how important sports is to his show. I mean, I've seen it a couple times,
Right.
but it makes sense, right? He and Seinfeld wrote it together, and then he's got his own show. So I get that. That makes a lot of sense.
Curb Your Enthusiasm was really an interesting chapter for me because I didn't know how to get 86 in there without telling you what you didn't already know. Jeff Pearlman has written a wonderful book called The Bad Guys Won. And you've seen documentaries, I'm sure, about the Mets and the Red Sox. So I didn't want to do a retelling. And I just thought, well, the Bill Buckner episode is so famous for Curb fans, and it's so heartwarming. And anyone who has watched Curb will tell you there aren't a lot of heartwarming moments in Curb Your Enthusiasm. When he catches the baby and he's high-fiving, and then I found the Larry David interview with Rich Eisen, everything just kind of crystallized. And I said, okay, I can break this up into pieces. I can talk about the 86 series for a few pages. I could talk about Buckner in the 86 series, how he probably shouldn't have even been playing, talk about his career, talk about Curb, give a background on Seinfeld. And before you know it, I had a 20-page paradigm written out. I didn't have 20 pages written out, but I said, okay, 3 pages here, 2 pages here, 4 pages here. And it was probably the easiest chapter for me to write.
Well, with pop culture, I know I keep asking questions, so I apologize, but I'm watching the NC State game. NC State's about to beat Duke, which is crazy, by the way. But with pop culture today, right? So is there anything that you see in the past 10 years, let's say, that if you were writing a book, you could tie baseball into pop culture? Because it definitely makes sense with Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm is now, but take that out of the equation. Is there anything else?
Mike, I don't know. That's a great question. I'm more of a retro guy. I'm more of a post-World War II to the 90s guy. I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, so I grew up on 60s reruns. And I would have to think about that. That's a great question. I think George Will said the best ball players were the ones who played when you were 12 years old. And I think you can say that about anything. The best TV shows, the best movies, the best broadcasters, the best newscasters, the best sports announcers. People can rave about whoever's doing the stuff now. Gary Cohen is terrific. I grew up on Bob Murphy, and Detroit fans grew up on Ernie Harwell. LA Dodger fans grew up on Vince Scully. They just hold a certain resonance to your childhood and your formative years. So I don't know. I would have to think about that. Right now I'm doing 78 and doing Bo. That's charting him from the 60s through the 90s. So that's right in my sweet spot as well. But I appreciate the question, and please never apologize for asking me questions.
Well, no, I was just thinking, they just had the Oscars, right? And one of the best lines was one of the comedians went and was talking about his favorite movie, which was Field of Dreams, and kind of dissected that for a couple of minutes, which, that's a younger person per se, younger comedian talking about that movie that wasn't probably, maybe he was alive when it was made, but he was little when it was made.
Well, I think it's just the world is just so different now, Mike. It's so fragmented. we don't live in a 3-network universe or 4-network universe. I lived in a time when we didn't have VCRs. So you either watched the show or you didn't. I'm writing about 1978, and one of the events I write about is Robin Williams playing Mork on an episode of Happy Days. I remember the day after that show aired, everybody in school was talking about it because 30 million people were in front of a television set, one of 3 networks most likely. Otherwise, in New York, you have channels 5, 9, and 11 as independent stations, or channel 13 PBS. Those were the major stations. We were all, to use a phrase, singing off the same song sheet.
Mhm.
Game of the week, you only had one national game. Everybody's watching it. Everybody's watching Monday Night Football. So there was a unification of the culture. I'm not saying politically or socially that everybody was unified, but when I use words like unified, what I mean is people were all going to the same movies. We were listening to the same radio stations. We knew what the popular songs were. You had basically had 1 or 2 sources as a newspaper per city. You know, if you were in New York City, you got what, 3 or 4 papers. Northern New Jersey, we had the Bergen Record and the Star Ledger. So there's so much more information coming out now, and I think we're losing that nostalgia. I don't know what kids today will be writing about in the 2050s. What will they be pining for? I have no idea.
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of times I'm working with people that my references to Cheers and what have you, they have no idea what I'm talking about, or MASH.
Well, it goes deeper than that, Mike. I used to be a news writer, and one of my bosses told me that when John Denver died,
Mhm.
he went into the newsroom and said, John Denver's plane crash, he's dead. And they looked at him like he was speaking Greek.
Right.
He said, you know, John Denver, the singer, they didn't know. They didn't know. And when I was at
Here's what's
MSNBC,
crazy about that, real quick. I'm sorry, but she's my ex-wife, but we're still pretty close. But when John Denver died, she walks past me crying. And I go, what's the matter? She was leaving work. I'm like, I've got to go home. I'm like, where are you going? John Denver died. I'm like, what? That's why you're leaving? But yeah, she was mortified. Yes,
I
yes.
was at MSNBC, and I came in and somebody said, David, Flounder died. I knew immediately who he meant. The
Yeah,
actor from Animal House.
yeah,
They said in the meeting, and all the 24-year-old associate producers had no idea.
right.
So we're kind of losing that, but that's why it's important for me to go back and chart these icons, if you will, and what made them so important. For the Red Sox, it was 67 and 75, and Yaz, and even Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was not universally liked in Boston. The Boston press did not band together and blast the Red Sox owner for sending him to New York.
Hmm.
He was not well regarded. And I have quotes from the newspapers to attest to that. Do kids today who are little leaguers read about Babe Ruth? I don't know. I have no idea. I hope they do.
Me too. Me too. Well, I've asked you a lot. I appreciate it. I'll
Oh,
take a step back, but it's been great. I've enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoy the book if you buy
I
it.
will. I'm going to go on Amazon as soon as this is over,
Well,
or Nebraska.
yeah, don't forget, you'll get a 40% discount with
Yeah.
Nebraska. And they have great titles this year. Not just mine, but not that I'm saying mine's a great title, but they have some wonderful books out today. And I encourage you to check all of them out and get the deal, because the publishers don't let these deals go on for months and months. You might as well lock it in. Any other questions, comments, rebuttal, concerns?
Yeah, David, I've had a long
Yes.
as a decently long-lived Bostonian now, I've wondered whether the difference between the two Boston teams, each breaking the color barrier in their own way, Sam Jethro with the Braves first, and much later Pumpsy Green, how those two things related to each other. Jethro happened so much earlier that were the Red Sox trying to say something at that point by how long they waited?
That's a great point, Matthew. I didn't explore that, but that's a great point. You may want to consider researching that for a journal article or a presentation at a conference. The Braves, I don't think it really took with Bostonians because they left. And they were gone by 53. They left in the spring of 53, I believe.
Just a few years after. I mean, he came in, he did well enough to get accolades and to get a certain level of respect and play. But yeah, the team did not stick around for that much longer.
So there was no chance for the Boston Braves organization, for the Braves organization actually, to curry any favor or stand up with pride and say, we stood up for New England and we integrated. They were gone within, when did he integrate? 50?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. So 3 years later, they're gone.
Yeah.
Who's going to talk about that when you're gone? With Brooklyn, you had Jackie, and he was there for 10 years, 10 seasons, and then 57 is the last season, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
Maybe 11 seasons. So 47 to 47 to 56 is what I think is Jackie's major league career. So, but he was there every day, playing and out in the community. So people knew who he was, and he was identified as a Brooklyn Dodger, and it was just reinforced every time he played anywhere. Didn't have that with Jethro, but that's a really great point.
Yeah. Well, I've wondered about it, and forgive me, I've asked a few people trying to get a good end-to-end story and find someone who's tackled it. If no one has, then yeah, I can find space in my heart for it.
Well, that's the thing. What Mike asked about how I get my ideas. If you're looking for information about something and you can't find it, then someone's trying to tell you that you should write that book, that article, that blog post, that essay. That's the one that you should do. With regards to Pumpsy Green, I know he's the answer to a trivia question, but it's unfair to have Jackie Robinson at one end of the spectrum and Pumpsy Green at the other, as if to say, well, within a couple of years, everyone was integrated, when that's not the case at all. I believe, I might have my years wrong, but I believe the Phillies integrated in 57 and the Tigers integrated in 58.
Yeah.
So it's not like Tom Yawkey was standing there so obstinate alone saying, I'm not going to sign a black player. All these guys were slow. And, Yankees fans will tell me, well, they didn't sign a black player because they didn't need one. They were winning all these World Series, and they didn't get Ellie Howard until 55, who for my money is tremendously underrated. And if you want to see how big Elston Howard actually was, go to YouTube and watch the fight between Billy Martin and Reggie Jackson when Billy Martin pulled Reggie from the outfield, and how Yogi Berra and Elston Howard were trying to separate them. Elston Howard towers over Reggie Jackson, and Reggie Jackson was a big guy.
Yeah, truth. Yeah, and I suppose he's not the only one. Let's see, because you had more than one team that integrated, at least with a player or two, and then moved not that long afterward. Because the A's were a similar situation.
Right.
So there's more to say beyond Boston. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for thinking about that in the Boston context.
And then it wasn't too long before there were black superstars in Boston who became fixtures. George Scott, Jim Rice certainly is a beloved figure.
Mhm.
Boston, Oil Can Boyd. So over time, as the generations kind of acclimated, as the younger generations said, it's not a big deal, either they can play or they can't. That's all we care about. We just care about winning.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'd be something else to think that the team had stayed and that's where Hank Aaron had ended up. Any other circumstances that follow that and have their own
Well,
relationship to his career. But
I've heard,
that's what you'd love to imagine, I think.
well, I've heard a story that Willie Mays and Hank Aaron both tried out for the Red Sox.
Hmm.
And can you imagine?
Hmm.
I mean, Aaron and Mays in the same outfield. My God.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, feedback, opinions, rebuttal?
No, but I'm a Nats fan, so I think of Bryce Harper, Juan Soto, and Mike Trout in the same outfield. That would have been a pretty good one.
Right.
Oh, I hear you.
All right, guys. Well, it's kind of an early evening. It's still Easter for a lot of us, and people have family and stuff in town. David, we appreciate it, obviously. Hope to
Thank
have you
you.
on again in the future, one of your other upcoming projects.
Hope so.
Thanks for all you do for SABR.
Oh, thank you.
And it's great knowing you. I really enjoyed your Can You Believe in Magic book. So
Yeah,
I will probably pick up this one, even though I'm not a Boston fan by any means. I do appreciate their history and certain eras and players.
I do have a bit of news to break for you because you're the Baltimore chapter. I got back the editorial notes and the proofs for an article that I wrote that's going in the Baseball Research Journal's next edition, and it is titled "Mary Dobkin, Baltimore's Grande Dame of Baseball." I'm sure you're familiar with Mary. She was a quite infirmed woman who had many, many, many operations, was not paralyzed, but had difficulty with mobility, had an amputation and so forth. And she organized leagues or teams rather, for underprivileged kids who couldn't afford to go to camp for the summer. So she organized these baseball teams called the Dobkin Dynamites. She was a celebrity in Baltimore. She knew Bubba Smith of the Colts. She knew Earl Weaver. She would bring kids to the stadium. And Edith Bunker, the actress who played her, Jean Stapleton, in her first TV role after she left All in the Family, was a TV movie about Mary Dobkin called Aunt Mary, which I also chronicle in the book. I also end the article by saying there should be a statue of her at Camden Yards. And I see a lot of games with throwback jerseys and jerseys for honoring the Negro League teams of different cities. I think that the Orioles should honor Mary every year. And one game, they should have replicas of the Dobkin Dynamites jerseys that they wear on the field. So I'm hoping someone from the O's organization reads this article and takes me up on that suggestion.
That'd be nice. All right, guys. Well, appreciate everybody taking their time out this evening to join us. We do have our next call Sunday, Wednesday at 7 p.m. If you need the link, let me know. You probably can get it from the SABR calendar. And we will see you next time around. And much appreciated. Reach out to me at any time. Our newsletter will be out probably in the next week or so, depending on people get their articles in on time. Season here, the Orioles are starting out pretty good, and got a long way to go. So have a good week, happy spring, and happy 2024 season. Good night.
All right, good night.